Hello, welcome back to Tiny Nest. I'm Kiva.
And I'm Jake. This is another episode in our building series,
where we show how we install our window trim. This is the shape of the material that we used. We gave it a clear coat with this stuff, which ended up looking like this, to match the windowsills. And then we made 45-degree cuts to make the pieces that we would need.
The first thing I'll point out is that, of course, the one that we decided to film had a bit of an issue with the paneling. I think it's because of the header that's in behind here. Basically, it made the paneling a little bit proud here compared to this face, but just of this one. The rest of the window is pretty much fine, and the other windows we've done so far haven't had this issue. But anyway, I took a knife and basically kind of tried to slice off some material there so that it'll fit a bit better. So it seems good enough now. We want the inner edge of the window trim to be halfway, like cover half of the face of the sills. So it'll sit something like that, but in order to get the length, it made no sense to measure and mark this edge for the cuts, even though that would have been a little bit easier for lining up with the saw and stuff. We needed to get this length of the inner edge because this point and this point need to be lined up so that the next piece, when it goes on, mates with this, but then also covers half of the other faces of the sill pieces here. So that's basically how we measured it, and that's how we're going about fitting it on here. So the technique I've been using is basically just lining up this way with those points halfway up here, just visually. It doesn't need to be like crazy perfect or anything. And then also just trying to line it up with covering half of this, and if there's any imperfections, just start getting it as close as possible. And then I'm going to shoot this down with the little finishing nail gun, and that will sort of be the starting point so that I can get the other ones lined up, and then just do what I can with the bottom one, basically. So for getting these pieces up and then having them line up with the bottom piece, the technique has been to basically get this seam lined up, as good as possible, and this edge it's like straight and everything, and then just put one nail up here so that there's still a bit of movement, like a little bit of play down here, and then I take the bottom piece, basically push it up, and then I can kind of move it around if it needs it. If there's a bit of a gap somewhere, I try to move it in such a way that it will reduce the gap a little bit. It's basically what I'm doing. And it also allows me to test to see if this is even going to work, or if there's something really weird going on, I'll be able to see it now, and there's a chance of fixing it rather than shooting these down all the way and then finding out that it's not going to line up properly. So that should really be good enough, but I am putting one extra nail in the centers just because it's pretty long. Like it's a little bit loose, so figure might as well get it nice and tight. And as always, I have the nail gun set to drive a bit shy, and then I'm just manually tapping them in until they're nice and flush so that we don't gouge the wood. So here's the window fully trimmed out, and I'll just show how the joints worked out, if I can just refocus here a bit. So this one's pretty good, and the bottom two are okay with just a tiny gap, not very noticeable. And then the top left one, there's a little bit more of a noticeable gap there. But considering that that's basically the compound error from what's really 8 cuts, I think it worked out pretty well, and it's good enough that when you stand back you don't really notice, and I think we're pretty happy with how it's turning out here. An issue that we've run into with the window trim is that you'll remember that these windowsill pieces, I sliced down and shortened this width dimension, and I figured that out by holding up scraps of the 1/4 inch paneling that we painted white that's on most of the walls up against the rough framing here, so that use that as a gauge so that the final product would be that this surface was flush with the wall surface, and then it would be a flat plane for the trim to rest against. But obviously we ended up with this tongue and groove stuff for 2 of the 4 walls, and it's a thicker material. And I can't remember if we had this or not by the time we were doing that, but we basically didn't account for it, just plowed ahead and made this as if it were to line up with the wood paneling, not this thicker stuff. So now we've got like a stair. So this is out proud, and then there's a big drop, and then there's this surface. So the window trim won't sit on there. So the solution we've come up with is to run the window trim through the table saw. We didn't want to have to use a different material. We wanted all the window trim to look the same. So basically you run it through the table saw to slice off a bunch of material like this, and you can see that when it sits like that, we've got the amount of material here makes this edge flush with this surface, and then this edge will rest up against here. To achieve this kind of piece, I basically just made a bit of a jig here by putting a block of wood and taped it down so that it doesn't slide around a whole bunch. And it's basically just acting as a spacer because I just need to take a very small slice off the backside of the trim pieces. So I've got that set. I've done a couple tests to make sure that it's gonna end up with the right thing. I don't wanna have to recut a bunch of pieces. So it's good to go. I'm gonna run 4 full-length pieces through. It should be enough to give me all the trims for the 3 windows that are on the feature walls. And so I'm gonna run it through to cut that off, and then I'm gonna reset the table saw so that I can cut off basically the other way to take the piece of wood out. So you'll see what I mean there. And I'll also point out that since all of the pieces of trim are already clear coated, I didn't want to scuff them all up. So my little guide stick here, I've put a scrap of rag on it so that I'm not scratching it. Here's what I've ended up with after the table sawing. And so obviously I want to cut out this bottom material, but since I need to lay these pieces flat to get my angled cuts when I'm cutting the pieces, that will fit around the window, I'm going to leave them like this for that process, and then I'll take the individual pieces and slice this off afterwards. I've got all my pieces cut, and I've reset the table saw, the fence, and the height so that it will not cut through the piece, just enough to slice right here to chop out this bit of material. And so basically just gonna run it through like that, and it'll create that step that I need to match the offset between the windowsills and the feature wall siding. I did the window in the TV room with the trim, and it was a little bit finicky. Turned out okay. It's gonna be imperfect because I'm cutting with the table saw, and our table saw is not perfect and all the rest of it. So I'm just gonna do my best, and so I'm just gonna show you this window. From doing a little test fit there, I can see that it's not really gonna work. So I just need to, it's just a matter of like 1/16 of an inch, so I'm going to see if I can just shave a tiny bit more material off some of these pieces so I have a bit more wiggle room to work with. Okay, after a moderate amount of fiddling, which included taking a knife and slicing a bit of material off of some of the boards here where they are close to the sill, I think I've got enough room to get this in here, so I'm going to give it my best shot. These ones have been a bit tougher because of all the steps involved, and getting them precise has been tough, so there's probably a little bit more of a gap on these ones than the regular ones on the paneling. But for the most part, it's pretty good in terms of we've got it making reasonable contact with the sill, and likewise against the feature walls, which was the whole point of all that extra cutting and everything.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you like what we're doing here, and turn on email notifications so you never miss a video. You can also find extra resources in the description below.
We spend countless hours making these videos for YouTube. So if you appreciate our work, take 3 minutes to watch the video in the top left tile to learn some ways that you can support us for free.
We'd really appreciate it.